This meeting is being recorded.
All right, well, welcome back to the Architecture of Reality. We are talking about the sun, the moon, and the stars right now. And one of the, uh, I think, one of the most interesting things throughout the Bible, but also one of the things that really um, hits home and I think expands the imagination about what God has done and what He's doing in the world is when you start seeing the sun, the moon, and the stars as more than just you know for practical use. But one of the things, though, that we forget that they are for practical use is the way the sun and the moon and the stars are clocks and calendars that God embedded within creation. When we look at we're going to look at the sun first as a clock because um, it, it's a clock for days and for weeks and for years. So it's a clock for days because obviously the sun goes down, the sun comes up, and from sunrise to sunrise or from sunset to sunset is one day. That cycle of a day is just embedded into reality, right? And from the very beginning, the measure of the day was one dark time through one light time, right? There was evening, there was morning. And the sun is created to fit the pattern that had already been set by the light that was spoken into existence on the first day. And you sometimes see uh, atheists object to the Bible because, well, look, there's light before there was sun. That doesn't even make any sense. Light comes from the sun, but they don't understand that it's a supernatural, miraculous creation story. So the creation of light doesn't bother somebody that believes that it's a supernatural creation story. It doesn't, but they also don't understand that the daytime and nighttime cycle was set, and then the sun, the moon, and the stars were actually given reign over that, or they were put in charge of the cycles of the cycles of the day, the cycles of the year, the festival cycles, because the sun now measures that day. Uh, Now, it's also used to measure a week. The only way to figure out what day of the week it is to count sunrises and sunsets. There aren't any other astrological phenomenon that last a week long. Um, there are other astral or cyclical ways to figure out uh, the year to the month, the different things, but the week is you just do it by counting. And uh, we count the days of the week because of how long it took God to create, plus a day of rest. So the week is really there embedded into or is embedded in by counting. Now there are also seven visible planets, and that hasn't gone unnoticed. So the days of the week have planetary names, but it's still only by counting that we get to a 7 day week. The sun's also a clock for measuring the year, 365 and a quarter days. Um, and Unlike the week, though, we don't just have to count because we also can use the autumnal and vernal equinoxes and the summer and winter solstices. They repeat every 365 and a quarter days. That's why every fourth year we have to add a day, because we have these repeating cycles of the autumnal and vernal equinoxes, the summer and winter solstices, and every 4 years they moved a day. So we have to add a day in February 29th in order to stay within the year. So we know that it's 365 and a quarter days long. And as the year goes along, the sunrise and the sunsets, they happen at different positions, and that's where the equinoxes and the solstices come from, because the sun moves along the horizon in its sunrise one direction, and then it changes and it moves back along the horizon the other direction, and that takes 365 days to get back to the position we started counting. So um, the year and the day are set, and then we, or God, and then us imitating God, we add the week by means of counting. And when God gave us the week, he was telling us this is the kind of creature you are, right? You work for 6 days, every seventh day you rest. You work for 6 days, every seventh day you rest. And that we were created, that pattern is given to us as a blessing. It's not we weren't created because of a 7 day cycle that needed to be filled by some creature, right? We were created and then given the 7 day week with 1 day of rest, and that fits us. We don't fit that. We weren't made for, or the Sabbath was made for us. We weren't made for the Sabbath, and that was the way that time has been marked from the beginning. And it wasn't until 1967 that there was anything that could be considered a more accurate clock invented than the sun. The so because in 1967, the General Council on Weights and Measures changed the definition of the second, right? That changed the definition of the second to the oscillations of a cesium-133 atom. So now the vibrations of a cesium atom is how the world keeps time. And so it wasn't until 1967 that the clock had something other than an astronomical basis. So we have the divisions of so all of the divisions of the hour and the second, the minute, those were all developed from the geometry of the movements of the sun. So that's why there's 360. We divide our circles up into 360. There's if you haven't studied a lot of geometry, then you would maybe look at the seconds and say, why is there 60 seconds in a minute? Why is there 60 minutes in an hour? Right? That is a strange divisions, but it all is developed out of the geometric movements of the sun. But in the ancient world, there were two kinds of calendars. There was the solar calendar and there was the lunar calendar. So Rome used the solar calendar. Israel used the lunar calendar, and the lunar calendar is one. There's two ways that you can divide up the months according to the sky. One is through the zodiac. What constellation of the zodiac the sun is rising and rising in on a particular day tells us what month we're in, or the cycles of the moon, right? Cycles of the moon are the other way that you have months marked out by the sky. And so you can either have a solar calendar, or you can have a lunar calendar. It's based on the changes in the rising of the sun in comparison to the sky, or the cycles of the moon, the face of the moon. And when God set up the Israelite festal calendar, it was all based on the moon. And this is in Leviticus and in Numbers. You see God set up a lunar calendar. And what's really interesting is theologically that ends up being developed as the prophets go on, and then in the New Testament it's mentioned quite a few times that Jesus is the rising sun of history, right? That there was the evening of history, and then the morning of history came when Jesus begins his preaches his first sermon. Basically, that's the mark of the rising of the sun, when Jesus opens his mouth publicly after he has been baptized, marked off as the Messiah. And given the uh, given the office, he his first sermon is marked as the rising of the sun. The people that sat in great darkness, the light is upon them. Right, the day spring from on high has visited. Um, the the Son of Righteousness shall rise with healing in his wings. All of these sorts of markers. The nations will come to your light, the kings to the brightness of your rising. All these different verses are are showing how cosmological the change is going to be that Jesus is bringing. Right, he's actually bringing history out of its nighttime into its morning. It's such a but because um, we don't think of the cosmos as one of the things that Jesus came to save. We sometimes we read right past these, or we individualize them. Right, the sun, the light happens in our hearts, or something like that. Right, that he's talking about the regenerative light that happens in our hearts when we hear Jesus speak. But what he's saying is he's bringing history out of darkness into light. He's bringing the world out of nighttime into day, right? So the entire lunar calendar, the whole Old Covenant calendar, was a shadow of things that would come. And this is why in Colossians, when it says we're not obligated to keep the Old Covenant calendar, because we're in a different sort of world, right? That all the way down to the elemental to the elemental level, Jesus's rule and reign has changed things, and that's because the sun, the moon, and the stars were given authority um, over the calendar, given authority over history, and now Jesus holds all authority in heaven and on earth. Right? It's not just that he has sort of a political authority on down here, so to speak. He actually has taken even the authority of the sun, the moon, and the stars to himself, or he was been given to it by God in the resurrection, in his anointing, in his seating at the right hand of God. He's been given all authority in heaven and on earth, and that includes cosmic authority, that includes cosmological authority over the ordering of the calendar. And then we're told in Colossians that all of that authority is to the church, right? So now the church, and people restored into the image of God, is what Colossians 1:15 through 20 is talking about. That we under Christ take up that dominion even over the calendar, and we set the calendar, right? So that's why now we count the calendar from Advent, right? We can say this is the beginning of the church calendar, and that's why they said that was year zero, right? That we count that first Christmas restarts the calendar, right? So it's the sunrise of Jesus's birth turned the tides of history all the way down to all the way down to the down to Hades, right, down to Sheol, the place of the dead, and then all the way up through the heavens. It shifted and changed everything. And so as we're going to talk next about how the sun, the moon, and the stars are signs and symbols and rulers, and that they are angelic beings in the Bible, that, or at least some of the stars are angelic beings in the Bible, that they're also symbols of God's people as rulers on the earth, and then they're symbols of civic rulers within society as well. But to to see the shifts and the changes in the calendar, you have to actually just understand how calendars work a little bit. And so hopefully that's helpful.